Hello, my name is Ernesto Cuba. I'm from the Graduate Center, City University of New York, CUNY. The title of my presentation is Why, Insert Name, Renaming Strategies in a Community of Transgender Women of the City of Lima, Peru. One of the most striking memories I recall from the interviews I made to a community of transgender women living in the city of Lima, Peru, is directly related to the use of new names in the process of gender self-determination. When I candidly asked my participants, what was the happiest moment during your gender transition, many of them almost immediately reply, the day when I received my official ID with my new name. So before carrying out my interviews, I was theoretically aware of the gendering role of renaming among transgender individuals. I was still very surprised to witness how emotionally charged and symbolic it was for several interviewees to be officially renamed by the Peruvian government. It is well known that anthroponyms can index gender meanings. People select the names of newborns for their newborns according to their sex assigned at birth. This piece of material information is critical to choose between a so-called girl's name or a boy's name. However, anatomic sex and gender identity are not directly linked, and such complex relationship is manifested in the onomastic practice of renaming. For cisgender people or individuals whose gender identity aligns with the sex assigned at birth, the names given by their parents or guardians would not present further conflicts with their gender identity. That is, parents' gender expectation and children's gender identity coincides. So it is unlikely that in adult life, gender identity will be a cause for a changed name. In contrast, for transgender and gender non-conforming individuals, names assigned by their parents would entail a mismatch between parents' gendering expectations and children's actual gender identity. To solve such mismatch, many trans and gender non-conforming people decide to rename themselves. According to Obasi and colleagues, renaming can be instrumental to complete the transition from a gender identity and its socially expected expression based on sex assigned at birth to a trans and gender non-conforming person's authentic gender identity and expression. Renaming can serve as a public expression of this change. Additionally, for socionomastic scholars, studying the phenomenon of renaming by trans and gender non-conforming people offers an opportunity to explore the performative intersection between anthroponyms and gender ideologies. In this presentation, I will discuss some renaming practices employed by a community of Peruvian Spanish-speaking trans women. To do so, I analyzed part of the corpus I constructed for my doctoral dissertation on Féminas, a grassroots transgender activist organization led by trans women and based on Lima, the capital of Peru. Broadly speaking, my dissertation aims to explore ideologies of gender, femininity, and gender language shared by the community of Féminas. Since December 2019, today, I carry out participant observation in the semi-public weekly meetings of the organization. I conducted 30 semi-structured interviews with activist and non-activist trans women with different levels of involvement within Féminas. When recruiting participants, I tried to grasp a broad diversity in terms of age, socioeconomic background, profession, and socialization with other trans women. To explore Féminas members' renaming practices, I analyzed the answer to the question, why insert name, where the respondent's social name is placed between square brackets. For instance, why Jessica asks for the personal motivation for choosing the name Jessica. As you can see in the image, I position the question between the sections A, childhood and adolescent, and B, gender transition. My purpose in asking the name question between these two sections was to link participant early memories with early memories with gender self-determination actions, assuming that renaming connects both aspects of their life paths. Before showing preliminary results of my study, it is necessary to explore how gender is expressed in Spanish anthroponomastics. There is not much room in Spanish language for gender-neutral names. That is, first names that can be used to refer women, men, and non-binary people. Among the few that I could gather informally among Latin American friends and colleagues are René, Alexis, and Guadalupe. Also in Spanish, several feminine first names derive from masculine first names. For example, my grandmother, who was born in 1925, was named Ernestina, which is historically derived from Ernesto, my own name. In stark contrast, derivation from feminine first names resulting in masculine forms are almost inexistent. However, a well-known case of this type of derivation is Evo, first name of former Bolivian president. Probably these formal patterns in Spanish anthroponyms may be the result of binary androcentric gender ideologies solidified during centuries. According to Fernandez-Juncal's study on historical changes in anthroponyms used in Spain, along great part of 20th century and beginning of the 21st century, the phenomena of derivation and gender-neutral names were receding. Consequently, Spanish anthroponyms are increasingly less ambiguous and more differentiated in terms of gender. She uses the expression hyperfeminization for the case of feminine-sounding anthroponyms. However, more research in other Spanish-speaking society is needed to see the distribution of such onomastic patterns. Before diving into the results, it is important to elaborate to some extent about the practice of death naming and how onomastic research on transgender individuals could avoid incurring in it. Turton defines death naming as an act of referring to a trans person by the usually gender-specific name assigned to them in infancy in cases where they have rejected that name in favor of one that better represents their identity. Unsurprisingly, many of Féminas members, if not all, regard death naming a pejorative practice which is weaponized to humiliate and misgender them. Regrettably, research on transgender people's renaming practices indirectly incur in death naming, particularly when discussing onomastic derivation from masculine-sounding names. Turton insightfully refers to this type of death naming as a quotational form of misgendering. For these reasons, to diffuse the harming effects of death naming, when quoting examples, I will not include participants' surnames, but only their chosen first names initials. Also, besides informant's age, I will not share other pieces of sociodemographic information. I identified 4 renaming strategies in my corpus: derivation, adoption of unmarried women's names, adoption of popular names in media, and avoidance leading to renaming. To organize the attitudes and stances negotiated in these renaming practices, I will adopt the model sketched out in Aldrin's work on Swedish parents' multiple motivations when naming their children, which is a chapter in this publication that you can see in the image. The lines represent scales with polarized social positions at their extremes. For example, the vertical line shows a continuum between pragmatic and aesthetic motivations. So when a name is chosen for pragmatic reasons, it's less likely that name giver pays attention to the aesthetic aspect of such name. So let's start with the findings, derivation. When I asked F why F, she replied, because my legal name is Francisco, and it's my paternal grandfather's name, and it's my maternal great-grandmother's name. Ah, your great-grandmother's name too, I replied to her. It was Mama Pancha. Pancha is the shorter version of Francisca. We used to call her. That's why all my old friends at work call me Pancha, Panchita, Panche. So it means a lot to you, yes. So here we can see the pattern of derivation is very transparent. As González Juncal mentioned, derivation is a practice that is start receding in the case of Spain. And anecdotally, I have the same impression in the case of Peruvian society. In this case, F is also bearing a name that is related to both male and female relatives. So in terms of social positioning and stance, we can see that there is an element of pragmatism, and also following a traditional practice, I can say even outdated practice of derivating names from masculine forms. Second, adoption of admired women's names. So many of the participants mentioned strong figures in their elderly life, like their mothers or some female heroes in the national history. So I saw also a pattern in terms of other kind of figures. So when I asked L why L, she replied, recalling a professor she met in her time studying education at college. My college professor was very pretty. She was very intelligent, very educated, very respectful. Then I remember that she was always very dedicated to my studies. So I felt a certain affinity. When I heard her name, I saw myself reflected in her. And that's when I said, now I am going to call myself L. Yes, L. So in this case, as in many other cases, this participant adopted the name of somebody who she admires, and who can also encapsulate a lot of the values that she wants to emulate, as beauty, intelligence, dedication to her own education. In terms of social positioning and stance, we can see that there is a lot of emotional investments towards the choosing of these names. So, to the next practice, adoption of popular names in media. So this is a very common force driving the adoption of names in all societies, I think. At least in Peruvian society, is quite common, either being transgender or cisgender populations. So in the left, you can see a post, an image with the faces of Bad Bunny, Pelé, Lionel Messi, well, we call Merlina, but it's Wednesday. So this is a publication from the National Identity and Civil Status Register Office of Peru. So it's the place or the institution where one go to, get their identity recognized, or you can go with your newborn and ask for an official ID with the name that you bestow upon them, right? So it was a surprise for me to know that in 2022, last year, the feminine sounding name Ruby was assigned more than 24,000 times to Peruvian newborns, assumingly girls. So why is that? Because again, popular names in media are a strong force in driving the change of anthroponyms. So who is Ruby? And Ruby is the main character of the telenovela, Mexican telenovela Ruby, which was originally released in 2004, and there was a reboot in 2020. It's sad for me to say this because Ruby is kind of not a very good or cool character. She was kind of mean against her opponents. So yeah. So the case for feminist member is kind of a reflection of the main society that adopting names of feminine names that encapsulate certain feminine image of femininity that they want to embrace, or they kind of admire. So for the case of M, she recalls the time when before she transitioned, gender transition. So when I asked M, why M, she said, my brother used to watch this series Rebelde Way, which is TV show from Argentina from the early 2000s. And I always like to see the girls when they act. And well, I like it, and I felt it was a nice name that is simple but strong at the same time. So I like it, and I thought, and through time, I also watched the soap opera, this Rebelde Way. And I said to myself, if I, at some point, I wanted to call myself, I would like to call myself that way. So you want to know how M looks like, the character with the name M looks like, is like this. So is teenager, or was a teenager character, very feminine, rebellious, pretty, white. So yeah, and actually that name M is very popular nowadays. So there is a long-standing impact of these very popular names in media. So there is a component of cosmopolitanism and also taste of modernity in choosing these names. So we can mark that, identify that in these lines of attitudes and stances. Finally, sometimes names are getting so popular that women decide not to choose them because they will get confused with other transgender women. This happened like many, many times. So one of my informants, who is in her 30s, mentioned that case. So I was looking for a name that was also common too, because there were many other who were called Monica, many who were called Cynthia. I don't know, common names. And then I saw that almost nobody was called P. In fact, I didn't know any other P. So when pursuing a name that sounds trendy or popular in that moment, there is a risk of repeating, the name and getting confused. And the confusion is even like bringing more problematic consequences if the other transgender woman is not very nice towards the first one, right? So P. We can see again, and there is like a tension between trying to sound internationally oriented, but at the same time, we're not losing their originality, their own, identity. So in summary, derivation is related to pragmatic motivations. So the practice is too traditional and even outdated, as I mentioned. Adoption of unmarried women's names leans towards personal originality and emotional connection. Because the adoption of popular names in media is related to aspiration of cosmopolitanism and modernity. And finally, renaming is a reaction to the extreme popularity of certain names and the continuing pursuit of originality. Thank you very much.